Morning.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me or no?
Hi, Alex.
All right. Hello.
Hello.
So I guess the idea is we're gonna wait to see if more people join, or how should we play this? Sure.
For the workshop? Hello?
Hello.
Hello, good morning. I would just like to confirm if we are here for the workshop.
Yep,
Okay.
That's the idea. I'm just waiting,
Okay.
a couple of minutes to see
Okay,
if
great.
other people are going to join.
Thank you.
The Identifying Talent workshop, and I hope everyone will enjoy it.
Me too. So I guess I just share my screen. Yeah. Don't know if we still want to wait more. Okay. Let's see. Yes. No.
Yes.
Cool. You guys can see this. Okay. Cool. Okay, I guess we'll just go ahead and start then, and if other people wanna join in, that's great. Otherwise, just us. Yeah. So thanks everybody for getting up early on a Saturday. I know it's maybe not exactly what you had in mind, but happy to chat today about a couple of things. The main topic, obviously, being so what we call identifying talent, but it really goes down to how you sort of detect, identify skills that people have. So I'm happy to talk about that. I think I made a sort of rough agenda just to make sure that there's some degree of structure, but obviously I think the idea is that the more questions people have, the more fun this is for everybody. So I'm happy to stop whenever and answer stuff. So I'll do a quick intro of Credo, of what we do as a VC, and then I'll talk a little bit about a couple of different topics that sort of generally, let's say, skill detection and school, and then a little bit about how we apply this to VC, a couple of ideas that I have for what direction this is going, and then happy to answer questions. There's also, I put this as bonus, I guess, on the agenda, but there's also something at the end that for any of you that are super interested in this topic, there may be opportunities for us to work together on this. So for those of you that are courageous enough to stick around, I would really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm happy to start with a sort of brief intro of Credo. By the way, I can't actually see you guys and how many, like, I can't see the room, but I guess it's all right. I'll stay on this side. So I'll start with a brief intro of Credo. So for those of you that don't know who we are and what we do, so we're an early stage VC focused on CEE, and everybody has a slightly different definition of what that means. I think historically for us, it was more about Central Europe, so mostly the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland. But since then, we've sort of made the map a little bit bigger in our heads and invested in places like Romania and Croatia. And now today, I'm calling you from Belgrade, so you can see that sort of the Western Balkans have become part of the region that we consider our sort of core geography. It's a 10-year-old fund. We're on our third fund. The numbers don't really matter here, but basically, I just wanted to tell you guys that we're sector agnostic, so we look at a lot of companies, no matter what industry they're in. Like most VCs, mostly B2B software businesses. And we're 11 of us, all based in Prague, except for right now, where we're spread out a bit, trying to cope with the pandemic. I just took some logos from our site on sort of what our portfolio looks like. But yeah, this is us. So we're an early stage VC, and we're here talking to you guys because young university students, as you can imagine, are important sources of talent, not only for us as a fund, but also for our companies. So I guess I wanted to start by saying something on school in general and sort of why we're talking about this. I guess it's kind of obvious to you guys if you're here participating in this, but I think there's a big part of our thesis and why the partners decided, or I guess what made it possible for the partners to decide that this sort of regional focus maybe makes sense. One element of that, at least, is the quality of the education in the region, and more specifically technical education. So I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys that countries like the Czech Republic produce some of the best sort of engineers you can find, and so the idea is there's an extreme quality of technical education, but there are still some issues in how those schools sort of produce talent. So on the good side, yes, obviously you produce people that are theoretically sound. You guys know math and computer science as good as anybody. Being in university teaches you work ethic. It teaches you how to meet deadlines, how to study things until you get them, and it teaches you how to work in groups, which is extremely important. And on the flip side, the sort of context of all of this, right, is that there's a little bit of lacking on the sort of practical skill set side. How do you know what you're learning is actually valued by your employers, and are you going to be able to use it? Sort of links to career preparation, so getting an idea of what you actually want to do. And what your skills can be used for. And then in some places, maybe I'm biased because I'm American, in some places cost is also a super prohibitive barrier. And so the idea is, what in trying to understand, skills and how we can map them and why they matter is, this sort of a conversation around identifying the things that schools don't do so well, and sort of what that means for us. So I guess it's really early in the morning and there's not that many of you. So I won't ask you to. I was gonna ask people for their thoughts here, but I suppose we can just sort of keep moving. And so yeah, with this in mind, I think like I pulled this from another VC that's done quite a bit of mapping of edtech stuff, and so I think the general message, like, we're not going to talk about each of these boxes, but the general message is just that like people have recognized this for quite some time now, and there's been a lot of effort to. Sort of, let's say, make different pieces of the educational value chain better, in an attempt, let's say, to either give people better skills or to make those skills more identifiable. And so the two boxes that I would focus on that I think are important to us are the sort of next gen school and the lifelong learning box. And the reason I picked these two and the reason I think they're important is these are where you see the most attempt to sort of, let's say, like fundamentally redo the learning process. So not tools to help you learn better, but really like go to the source and say, are we teaching people things the right way? So I think it started, if you think of like the waves of edtech innovation, I think the first thing people think of are the online courses, so like MOOCs and things that really took off in the US. Just basically saying we can democratize access to difficult subjects and make it easy for anybody to study physics at MIT. And then I think it's become sort of deeper than that, where if you think about like Lambda School, and I'm not sure if it's exactly in the bucket of like income sharing agreement schools, but I think that that trend of like, let's actually fundamentally redo what a school is and say, what, don't make people pay for it and go up front. Let's promise them employment in exchange for a share of what they make. And so you've seen, like, let's say, I think deeper and deeper innovation in the last decade of how can we reshape our relationship with school. And in my case, the one I wanted to maybe share a bit more, to share a bit of my thoughts on is one that I'm biased on because I went to it, called 42. So for any, I don't know if there are any French speakers, but this is called 42 in French. And basically the it's a school focused on computer science. And the idea is basically make it open to everyone, make it free for everyone, and make a curriculum that's super peer-to-peer based, project-based, gamified, any buzzword you want. And you do a super hard entrance exam that basically just tests your motivation. It's not particularly difficult, but it's a continuous month-long thing that you have to, sort of put your whole life into for a month if you want to be able to go. And if you pass that, your entire school is free, and you get access to extremely high-quality sort of gamified computer science projects. You get support for finding internships, this kind of stuff. And the reason I highlight this is not it's not because I think it's the only answer, but I think in terms of practically measuring whether or not we're giving people skills that matter, it's an interesting data point, right? So I put a screenshot in the bottom right of startups you've seen from this school, and I think there's like 50 plus now, not just in France, sort of all over Europe. I put a link here, and I'll share the slides afterwards if you guys are curious. But there's companies that are raising, like this company, it's kind of small, Melly Search, that raised with Local Globe. There's companies that are raising with sort of tier 1 VCs, and that are all from a school that was only founded, 8 years ago at this point, and is only on its 6th or 7th batch of graduates. And I think that's super powerful. If you can have a school that's less than a decade old and has, let's say almost 25,000 alumni and 30 campuses that they integrated all over the world, basically by licensing the content. I think there's this idea that, somewhere in this equation, they seem to have cracked the skills question of like, okay, we can redo our computer science education so fundamentally that we can give people only the skills they need to be able to basically, go build companies. I think it's an entirely different skill set than saying we want to produce the world's leading, AI researchers. But it's a valuable data point of saying like, look, what happens when you really sort of reshape the way school is done. And we don't have to talk about my story. I'm a bit of a, let's say, a fake student of 42 in the sense that I passed the piscine and I went for like 2 or 3 months with some of my friends, and then ended up sticking to the school that I was in before because I ran out of time. But it still is a place where I met a lot of colleagues and a lot of people that are now working in these startups. So I think it's a good example, and I think I use 42 as this notion of like, okay, why 42 has worked is because it gives people the practical skills, like I said, and it also gives them sort of practical experience requirements. So, one thing they do is if you work on a skill, as you do a tree of the sort of curriculum, then at some point they make you leave to go do an internship before you can continue, and then you come back and you can keep going through your curriculum. So there's this sort of really push out the door on making sure you're testing the sort of applicability of your skills, which I think is really great. And the theme between all of these on that like massive map of edtech that I showed you, and in 42 or any other example, is this sort of shift in skills from declared skills to implicit skills. I mean, these are the words I'm using. I'm not actually sure if these are the right words for this, but to me, it's we're shifting from a world in which you tell me what your skills are, and you put them on your LinkedIn profile. You have grades from courses. You have a diploma that says you studied something. We're really moving it towards a world in which I sort of tell you what your skills are based on things that you've done. And I think that's the sort of macro shift of like whether I can scan your GitHub and tell you, what kind of languages you like to use, whether you make mistakes in those languages, what kind of sort of repos you contribute to, what that says about your interests, whether you win a hackathon, whether you have some deliverable, or whether you have a side hustle. Basically, the idea is like we can measure your skills without you telling us what they are. And I think this is the trend that everything is moving toward. And there's a couple of like, let's say, I think we've already tried doing this for quite some time and sort of making skills more implicit. So like giving people skills that they don't have to list somewhere. And there's, I think you guys are probably quite familiar with this concept of a skill cloud, of basically saying, what if your professors and anybody you work with in universities sort of maps your results on particular modules to saying you've acquired a skill, and then you have an idea, basically, if you make that data accessible to somebody like us, then we basically know without you telling us, we have some idea, that you have JavaScript skills or something like this. And I think like that's an interesting idea, but you run into this problem of, who decides when you've hit that threshold. So again, there's the sort of human element of like somebody has to say you've done something, whether it's, your grade on a course or whatever that is. I think the next sort of way we've tried is the partnerships you push between pure academia and the professional world. I'd say startups here, but we can extend this, right? So we love that kind of thing as investors. It's like you either are getting unique insights from somebody that has decades of experience, or you can get sort of that unique insight in the form of intellectual property, typically in sort of a new research technique for something. So that's also an exciting way that sort of works. Projectizing work is similar, but basically what I mean here is like making students make things instead of say things. So, exams that are about deliverable sort of functioning systems than tests. Continuous learning is a huge part of this, is we basically say, okay, maybe you have a skill today, but the only way I know if it's, like a real skill that would be implicitly detected is basically if it stays a skill over time. And so, there's this idea that if somebody studied computer science a long time ago, it's actually really hard to keep up with the wave of innovation. So you need a way to continuously evaluate whether somebody stays up to date. And then there's this idea of like, we've introduced in universities this idea that maybe people should have some complementary modules. So like you don't take only one thing, you take multiple classes that sort of give you more concrete skills along with whatever you're doing. So, I said you can read a business plan, and the message is just that, like, I think one way of moving to sort of concrete skills is by mixing skills a bit, is by, giving somebody, like, let's say a little bit broader foundation in many things that allows them to have at least a semi-operable sort of knowledge base. And the example, obviously, the reason that I'm talking about this, my example is going to be from VC, and why I think this is important to us. So, our job as VCs, yes, our job is to invest money and to hope that money turns into more money. And I think that, but in reality, what we're doing is we're identifying sort of promising teams, promising early stage companies, and we're finding out a way to add value to those companies, right? And the number one way that we do that for really young companies, so for companies that are extremely, extremely young, is hiring, is giving them talent, is making sure that we can convince the smartest people, the smartest students, the smartest experienced hires that they should work for our companies. And there's sort of two pieces to that puzzle. One is identifying talent. So one is how can we actually spot talent, and one is how can we match that to our companies. I think on the spotting front, this is where things are more interesting, and this is what I'll talk the most about. Is experienced hires is it's like a traditional hiring that you would think of. It's recruiters. It's people that can basically say, you know what, this person worked at Google, is now quitting their job and looking for a new one. I can reasonably assume they're good at what they do. That's relatively straightforward in my mind. And what's not straightforward is on the younger side of the population. So like for students, is how you need to spot talent early, but it's hard because you have fewer data points. And so the idea is, it's a huge competitive advantage if every single talented engineer from like the Czech Technical University comes to work for our startups. It's a huge, huge advantage. But the idea is we don't have a way to actually identify who the sort of, let's say really ambitious, smart students are. And then there's the second problem of matching them, which I don't really think you can automate in any meaningful way for now. So if we focus like a little bit on this VC question, right? So I put this extremely simple, like for the way we typically work with building talent pools and then screening people, then matching them, and then trying to ask our companies whether we do it well. And like I said, the thing that really matters in this case is the first one, is how we sort of identify in an automated way talent. So I work on this, and I'll show you guys something in a second if you're interested. Is I work on basically building systems to automate how we detect people that could be interesting for us, and companies as well. But that's not the focus of this talk. So basically, I can look at schools, so people that are top students from particular schools, and the way that you get that data from schools is different. I can look at hackathon winners. I can look at open source contributors to get an idea of who somebody is. But the idea is like implicit skills, at least the way I define them, are actually like becoming much easier to identify online. And so if you're smart with orchestration, you can essentially make a bunch of web scrapers, or you can pay for access to APIs about this stuff. And basically, I can build lists of people, and I can try and map skills to them, and then I can give them to our talent partner, Teresa, who's not here today. But basically, I can say, look, this person is extremely talented. We should get them to work for, I don't know, product board. And we do this. And so basically, once you do this, once you can do this in an automated way, it means you can spend less time screening people, like trying to manually screen people for their skills, giving them tests and stuff. And you can focus on the personal fit, which means that matching companies becomes a lot easier, which means that, the expectations we have with our companies sort of get aligned in the sense that they know precisely why we recommend somebody to them, because they have a sort of data trace of why we did it. And so this is relatively straightforward as a process. A few ideas for where I think this is going. I think this is a good first step, but the real challenge is now trying to come up with ideas for what are other sources of implicit skills that I can't think of in off the top of my head, like your GitHub and this kind of stuff and your grades and whatnot. And so for me, like a big one is side hustles, is the fact that a lot of people do things on the side now. They launch a product on Product Hunt in addition to their full-time job. They build some small cash generating business. They contribute to projects in a particular domain. Like this is super important because it gives more and more data points to people like us to be able to build a picture of who you are and what you're good at. Open source contributions are sort of in that wave as well, basically saying, if you take the time required to contribute to these projects and you have the skills required that your commits, your pull requests basically get accepted, then that's a huge reflection of your interest and your skill set. And then I think there's an emerging conversation around like what actually matters in the sort of adaptability versus maximum skill in one area. So traditionally, for young people, I think it's really, really important that employers are trying to identify your ability to learn, and so they use school as an indicator of that. They like to see some degree of you can pick up new skills and you can be molded essentially. But then on the flip, when we recruit technical profiles, we often actually don't care about that. We often say, what, show me your maximum skill in one thing, and that gives me an idea of who you are. So there's this tension between those two things that I think we haven't actually figured out how to map that into sort of skill, like which one is more important for like scoring a skill in some way. So I think that's something that I personally think a lot about. And then two other thoughts that I want to do quickly so that I can have you guys ask questions if there are any, is basically, I think one thing that has changed this conversation a lot is this sort of shift to the like no code tools. What it means is that now, non-technical people have a way to build projects that require technical capabilities. So it means the sort of, you can't just use technical skills as a way to sort of evaluate people. It means that now technical people also sort of have to demonstrate interest on top of it, because it's no longer, even non-technical people can have the like basis necessary to build a couple of things from scratch. So that you sort of have to go above and beyond now, I think. And then the final thought, which is sort of links to what I talked about with my bonus, is the bonus sort of point I have is that like if we get this to work for people, which is we can, in terms of we have a lot of individual data points on people and what they do, then why can we not do the same thing for companies? So why can we not, this thing I show you, like why can we not also identify companies this way? Because they also leave data points online of maybe not skills they have, but things associated with their performance, right? And we actually do. And I put a little quote here about Motherbrain, which is a really cool, way more complex than I would understand AI system built by a Swedish VC. They have 30 engineers that work on it, and it's identified, I think, 7 or 10 investments that they've made to date. So it's sort of, I really encourage you guys to read about that if you're interested. But they put a lot of thought into how can we really identify all the data points associated with people and the companies they build. And on that note, I actually don't know how many of you are in this room, but on that note, for any of you that are interested, we spend a lot of time thinking about this at Credo. I personally spend a lot of time thinking about this at Credo. And basically what we're thinking of now is, how can we take this to sort of the next level, and how we not only come up with ways of identifying people's skills, but also how we come up with, ways of let's say, identifying people and companies in more systematic ways. So I built sort of initial products on our side that do this. And now we're at a point where we're sort of looking for help in how we can improve on this. So the idea is, I don't have a job description today. I don't have anything in particular, but basically I have a sign-up form for anybody that's vaguely interested in these topics and knows JavaScript. And sometime in the very near future, we'll sort of reach out to anybody that is interested with an idea of how we can, sort of come up with some sort of process for screening people. But for anybody that's interested, I meant to also copy the link to put in the chat, but I don't have it, so I'll find it later and send it to the. I'll send it to the event organizers. But anybody that's interested, I'm super happy to get in touch. And otherwise, I guess I wanted to leave time for questions if there are any. It's way more fun if you ask questions, so please do. And that's all I had.
really enjoy it. Maybe my question might be regarding the issue you have already mentioned. My impression is that students are increasingly, looking for some like good mentors from companies. They don't want just, to apply for a job as a Java developer without knowing in which environment they will be working and whom they will meet and what are the gurus and great mentors they can learn from. Yeah, so I would be really curious, if you have some idea how we can identify and promote these like great mentors from these great companies to students, so they just have chance to meet them, maybe see their project, see what they are doing. Yeah. So if you can elaborate on this.
That's interesting. So to make sure I've understood, basically like how, you're basically saying that the recruiting process is also from students identifying what companies are good for them and how they can have a better idea of who companies are.
Yeah, because in our faculty, students have like many options. A lot of options. Yeah. So it's not like they are looking for first company to come, but they are just choosing from like many companies. And at this stage, yeah, it's very important to show the benefits for them. Yeah, and salary is important, of course, but in my opinion, they are more and more looking to their personal growth, yeah, to the environment and great mentors they can learn from. Yeah? So that's the point. How we can make this information available for them, because traditional hiring tools are just looking for Java developers and that's it. No information about the culture, the people they will work with, and the job they will do, the vision of the project, for example, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is hard to like systematically handle, and part of it is easy. I think the easy part, and the part, at least the schools that I went to in the US and France, the way it worked is, you have to have internal school-only places for people to leave transparent feedback about their work experience. So, the traditional platforms where people go read job reviews, like, there's selection bias there. And most people are not comfortable sharing extremely negative experiences with other people. So I think part of like figuring out what it's like to work for the company and figuring out what the sort of vision is, I think is, you have to have internal places where people from the university feel comfortable sharing positive and negative experiences about internships, about things like that. So at the schools I went to, it was literally a student-only groups where you can, every time for example, if the university is required to sign a piece of paper that says, you completed an internship, you are also required to provide them with like a private testimonial of, what it was like for you, what the people were like. And then that is available to any other student who's interested in that company. And I think that's super powerful, just because you get honest feedback that people wouldn't necessarily want to leave on like Glassdoor or some other public review site. But on the point of like, as new jobs are created that nobody has done and nobody can have a review of, I think that's where if we do a better job making sure that like people have the skills, then they can jump in these sort of recruiting processes straight to the personal fit conversations. They have to worry less about, it can become early on, your first interview with companies can become about personal fit because they have some degree of confidence in your skill set, right? So I think that's also part of it is, as you do skills better, it becomes easier for like students to easily get in touch with these companies and get an idea of whether they'd be a personal fit. But I think it starts with the private reviews and stuff. Anybody else? Any other questions, particularly on anything? No, nothing. No questions on skills, on VC, on anything. Okay. Well, that's all I had from my side, guys.